Less than 24 hours after my husband turned to ash, my only son stood in our living room and told me to leave. He checked his gold watch and declared that this was his house now. He thought 40 years of marriage had left me weak. But as I held the ceramic urn against my chest, I realized he had no idea what his father had really left behind. My name is Eleanor Whitford. At 67 years old, I had expected the end of my marriage to come with a quiet fade. But Harold's death felt like a violent tear in the fabric of my universe. The cancer had eaten away at him for 3 long years, reducing a man who once built our porch with his bare hands into a fragile skeleton beneath hospital sheets. Now, he was gone, and I was standing in the center aisle of the Cedar Falls Community Church, greeting people whose names I struggled to remember through the fog of my grief. The service was simple, just as Harold had wanted. The pews were crowded with neighbors, former colleagues from the hardware store, and friends we had known since the 70s. I had spent my entire life in this town, in this community. I had given up my acceptance letter to nursing school to marry Harold, and then I had given up my part-time job at the library to raise our only son. My resume was short, but my life was full of made lunches, driven miles, and the quiet pride of holding a family together. Then the double doors at the back of the sanctuary swung open. Gavin walked in. He looked like he had just stepped off a private jet in Austin rather than a rental car in rural America. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. He was 42 now, a tech entrepreneur with a face that appeared frequently in business magazines. He walked fast, checking his phone with every other step, his thumb scrolling frantically across the screen. Trailing behind him were his wife, Melanie, and my 2 grandchildren, who looked at the church ceiling with bored expressions. Gavin did not rush to hold me. He gave me a quick, one-armed hug, his body stiff. Traffic was a nightmare. "Mum?" he said, his eyes darting over my shoulder to scan the room. "We have a conference call at 5, so I hope this doesn't run long." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I looked at him and tried to find the boy whose skinned knees I used to bandage. Harold and I had sold our 4 acres of land by the highway to pay for Gavin's Ivy League tuition. We had taken a second mortgage on our house to give him the seed money for his first startup. Harold used to squeeze my hand when we looked at our dwindling savings account and say, "He is our retirement plan. Elle, he is a good boy. He will take care of you when I am gone." When it was time for the eulogy, Gavin stepped up to the podium. He did not cry. He did not tell stories about fishing trips or the way Harold used to laugh at his own bad jokes. "My father was a practical man," Gavin said into the microphone, his voice smooth and practiced. "He taught me that emotion is a liability in business. He taught me to focus on the bottom line, to be strong. That is the legacy I carry forward." It felt cold. It felt like a quarterly earnings report. I sat in the front pew, clutching a damp tissue, feeling a sudden, terrifying distance between me and the child I had raised. By late afternoon, the guests had left. The funeral home director closed the heavy oak doors, and I drove back to the 2-story wooden house on Elm Street. It was the only home I had known for 40 years. The paint was peeling slightly on the trim, and the porch steps creaked. But it was ours. Gavin and Melanie had come back to the house briefly to use the restroom before heading to their hotel. I was in the kitchen, brewing a pot of tea, when I heard Melanie's voice drifting from the hallway. I know, she was saying, her voice low. "It is depressing. The whole place smells like damp wood and old medicine. Honestly, it is not worth fixing up. The land value is decent, though. I stood frozen, the ceramic teapot trembling in my hands. They were talking about my home, my life, as if it were a failed asset. They left 10 minutes later without saying goodbye. I locked the front door and carried Harold's urn to the living room. I placed it on the mantel, right next to his favourite fishing lure. The house was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock. I sat in Harold's armchair and pulled his old flannel blanket around my shoulders. A memory surfaced through the exhaustion. It was from 2 weeks ago, when Harold was lucid for the last time. He had gripped my wrist with surprising strength, pulling me down to whisper in my ear. He had wheezed, his eyes burning with a clarity I had not seen in months. Don't worry about the house. No matter what Gavin says, you will see what I did to protect you. I did not understand what he meant then, and I did not understand it now. I looked at the cold ash in the urn and felt a shiver of unease. I wanted to believe Gavin would take care of me. He was my son. He was rich. But as the shadows lengthened across the floorboards, I could not shake the feeling that the coldness in his eyes at the funeral was just the beginning. I was still wearing my faded blue bathrobe when the front door opened. It was barely 9 in the morning. I had not slept. On the kitchen table, a single candle flickered next to Harold's framed photograph, the wax dripping onto the lace tablecloth. Gavin strode into the kitchen, followed closely by Melanie. They did not remove their shoes. The heavy thud of Gavin's Italian leather loafers on the linoleum sounded like a gavel striking a bench. There were no hugs this morning, no condolences. Gavin carried a thick leather portfolio, and his expression was tight, focused, the way he looked when he was about to close a deal. We need to talk finances. Mom, he said, pulling out a chair and sitting opposite me. He did not ask how I was. He did not look at the picture of his father. I tightened the belt of my robe, feeling suddenly exposed. Gavin, can this wait? We just put your father to rest yesterday. Time is money, and money does not wait for grief, he replied sharply. He unzipped the portfolio and slid a stack of legal documents across the table, stopping them just inches from my cold cup of coffee. Dad and I spoke before he passed. He was clear about his wishes. He knew you would not be able to manage this place alone. He wanted the house to belong to someone who knows how to use assets effectively. My breath hitched. I reached for the urn I had placed on the sideboard, needing something solid to hold on to. What are you saying? Gavin leaned forward, his eyes cold and flat. I have already spoken to the lawyers. Technically, and morally. This is my house now. We have found a top-tier assisted living facility for you in Austin. It has a garden, a pool, 24-hour care. You should move there. You cannot manage this property anymore. The words hung in the air, sucking the oxygen out of the room. A nursing home. But I am 67. Gavin, I am not invalid. It is for your own good. Melanie chimed in, tapping a manicured fingernail on the documents. Just sign this. It is a temporary transfer of deed. It gives Gavin the power to manage the bills and the taxes, so you do not have to worry. We need to get this filed today before the tax laws change next quarter. She uncapped a fountain pen and held it out to me. The gold nib glinted in the sunlight. I looked down at the papers. The text was dense, but the header was bold, General Warranty Deed. My hand trembled as I reached for the pen. But something inside me, a whisper of the intuition Harold always praised, made me pull back. I need to read this first, I stammered. My head is not clear today. Leave it here. I will look at it tonight. Gavin slammed his hand on the table. The candle jumped. We do not have tonight, he shouted, his facade of calm crumbling instantly. I have already taken a deposit on this land. The developers are ready to move. I need that signature now to close the deal. If I do not deliver the title by Friday, the contract is void. Do you have any idea how much money is on the line? My entire projection for the fiscal year depends on this liquidity. I stared at him, horror washing over me like ice water. You sold my house before your father was even cold. It is an asset, Mum. It is just wood and dirt. He stood up, pacing the small kitchen. I have debts. I have leverage requirements for my new venture. If this deal falls through, everything I have built could collapse. I am not signing, I said, my voice shaking but firm. Gavin's face turned a shade of red I had never seen before. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a set of keys, throwing them onto the table. They slid across the surface and hit the urn with a metallic clank. Fine. Play the victim. He spat. But let's be clear. I had a locksmith here while you were at the grocery store last week getting food for the wake. These are the new keys. I have the only other set. You are just a guest here until I say otherwise. He leaned down, his face inches from mine, and I smelled expensive cologne mixed with the sour scent of desperation. It is my house now. Mum, get used to it. I looked at Melanie, searching for any sign of sympathy. She just rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. Don't be selfish. Eleanor, she said, her voice dripping with disdain. You are clinging to a pile of rotting wood when Gavin could turn it into something real. You do not even know how to use the money. Gavin snatched the papers back and shoved them into his portfolio. We are going to lunch. When we come back, you better be ready to sign, or I will have the movers here by tomorrow morning. The front door slammed shut behind them, shaking the walls. I sat in the silence, staring at the shiny new keys on the table. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. I picked up the urn and pulled it into my lap, rocking slightly. They thought I was weak. They thought I was just a confused old woman. But as I looked at the keys, the physical proof of his betrayal, the tears stopped. Harold had told me not to worry. He had said I would see what he did to protect me. I looked at the closed door, and for the first time since he died, I did not feel just grief. I felt the cold, hard steel of suspicion. I was alone in the room, but I was not leaving. Not yet. The rain was hammering against the windshield of my old sedan as I pulled into the parking lot of the Starlight Motel. It was a rundown place off the interstate, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzed with a dying flicker and the air smelled of exhaust and damp concrete. It was a far cry from the gated community in Austin where my son lived, and a painful distance from the home I had just been forced to flee. I paid $59 in cash for a room on the ground floor. The clerk, a young man with tired eyes, barely looked up from his magazine. Checkout is at 11, he mumbled. No loud noise after 10. I nodded, clutching the plastic keycard like a lifeline. Inside room 104. The carpet was stained, and the wallpaper was peeling at the corners. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, my suitcase at my feet. But the most important thing I had brought with me was not my clothes. It was a small, polished cherry wood box that Harold had kept in the back of his closet for decades. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Gavin's face twisted in rage, throwing the keys on the table. The silence of the motel room was suffocating. My mind drifted back to the last year of Harold's life. I remembered the days he would dress up in his Sunday best, despite the pain in his bones, and tell me he had to go to the bank. I remembered the hushed phone calls he would take in the garage, speaking to a man named Martin in Dallas. I had assumed he was settling old debts or perhaps arranging the funeral. But now, the pieces were starting to shift in my mind. I pulled the wooden box onto my lap. It was heavy. I used the small brass key I had taken from his keyring before Gavin demanded them back. The lid creaked open. Inside, resting on top of a velvet lining, was a single silver key and a thick white envelope. My heart stopped when I read the handwriting on the front. For L. Only open if Gavin touches the house. My hands shook so hard I nearly dropped it. A chill went down my spine. Harold had known. He had foreseen this exact moment. I tore the envelope open. My dearest L. The letter began. Harold's jagged handwriting filling the page. If you are reading this, it means my worst fears about our son have come true. I am sorry I could not tell you sooner, but I did not want to break your heart while I was still alive to see it. I let out a sob, pressing my hand over my mouth. I found out 3 years ago. The letter continued. Gavin used my name to guarantee a loan for a company called Novus Frontier Ventures. He forged my signature. L. He put us at risk for millions. I paid it off quietly, using the retirement savings I told you we lost in the market crash. But I knew then that I could not trust him with your future. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs. He stole from us, I whispered to the empty room. I forced myself to read on. Harold explained that he had contacted a lawyer named Martin to create something called the Living Horizon Trust. The house does not belong to me anymore. L. Harold had written. And it certainly does not belong to Gavin. It belongs to the trust. And the trust has a clause. If any beneficiary tries to force you out, threatens you, or attempts to sell the property while you are living, they are automatically disinherited. You have the right to live there until your last day. Call Martin immediately. Do not let your love for our boy destroy the only shield I could leave you. I dug deeper into the box and found a photocopy of a document. It was a loan agreement for Novus Frontier Ventures, and there, at the bottom, was a signature that looked like Harold's, but with a slight tremor that did not belong to him. It was proof. Gavin had been using us as collateral for his risky games for years. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. The papers Gavin had tried to make me sign earlier that day, they were likely an attempt to override the trust. Or perhaps he did not even know the trust existed and was trying to sell a house he did not legally own. I walked into the small bathroom and turned on the harsh fluorescent light. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen. My hair was a mess. I looked like a defeated old woman who had just lost her husband and her home. But as I stared at my reflection, I thought of Harold keeping this secret to protect me. I thought of Gavin's sneer when he said it was his house now. I wiped the tears from my cheeks with the back of my hand. No, I said to the reflection, my voice cracking but gaining strength. He thinks I am just a mother. He thinks I will just fade away. I gripped the edge of the sink, my knuckles turning white. If he wants a war, I whispered, the trembling in my hands finally stopping, then I will fight by his rules. by 9 o'clock the next morning. I was sitting in the quiet, climate-controlled vault of the central bank on Main Street. The safety deposit box slid open with a heavy metallic sound that echoed in the small room. Inside, just as the letter had promised, was the deed to the house not in Harold's name, and certainly not in Gavin's, but in the name of the Living Horizon Trust. I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. It was real. I had the right to live in my home for the rest of my life, regardless of who held the title. The branch manager, a kind woman named Mrs. Higgins, who had known Harold for 20 years, saw my shaking hands when I emerged. She steered me into her office and wrote a name on a slip of paper. "You need to see Rosa," she told me gently. She handled my mother's estate when her nephew tried to pull something similar. She is not fancy, Eleanor, but she is a shark. Rosa Delgado's office was tucked above a bakery on 4th Street, smelling faintly of yeast and old law books. She was a sharp woman in her 50s, with reading glasses perched on a nose that had seen too much trouble. When I repeated Gavin's words to her specifically, the phrase about it being his house now, she slammed her pen down on her legal pad. "That is textbook," Rosa said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "It is called elder financial abuse. Eleanor. He is banking on you being too grief-stricken to read the fine print. If you sign that temporary transfer he gave you, you are effectively signing a quitclaim deed. Do not sign anything. In fact, do not even hold a pen in his presence." While in Rosa's office, I made the call to Martin, the lawyer in Dallas. Harold's letter had been accurate. Martin confirmed the existence of the trust and the specific clause Harold had inserted. "Your husband was very specific, Mrs. Whitford." Martin's voice crackled over the speakerphone. "If Gavin attempts to coerce you, threaten you, or force you out, he triggers a forfeiture clause. He loses his beneficiary status entirely. But we need proof. We need him to hang himself with his own rope." I felt a surge of adrenaline. I needed eyes on the ground. I called Carol, my neighbour across the street, who spent most of her days tending to her hydrangeas and watching the neighbourhood through her blinds. "Oh, Elle, thank God you called," Carol whispered, though I knew she was alone in her house. "It is a circus over there. There are 3 men in dark suits walking around your yard with laser measures. And Gavin, he is pacing the porch, screaming into his phone. I heard him say, 'The deal with Horizon Ridge Developments is locked. I just need to clear the occupant. Clear the occupant. Elle, like you are termites.'" My hand tightened around the phone. "Keep watching. Carol. Write down everything." I left Rosa's office feeling armed for the first time, but my stomach was still in knots. As I walked toward the parking lot of the County Family Court building where I had parked my car to avoid paying the meter on the main street, I saw a familiar figure standing by a silver luxury sedan. It was Melanie. She was not with Gavin. She was standing alone, furiously wiping tears from her face. She spotted me and froze, quickly putting on large sunglasses to hide her eyes. "Melanie," I asked, approaching slowly. She flinched. "Oh, Eleanor. I was just meeting a friend. She is having trouble with her husband. Asking about divorce lawyers." I looked at the directory near the building entrance. The only offices open today were for family law and domestic disputes. I looked back at my daughter-in-law. Her designer bag was clutched tight against her chest, her knuckles white. "There is no friend." "Is there?" I asked softly. Melanie's shoulders slumped. We ended up in a small coffee shop around the corner. She did not drink her latte. She just shredded the paper napkin into tiny strips. He is leveraged to the hilt. Eleanor, Melanie whispered, looking over her shoulder as if Gavin might materialize from the espresso machine. The cars, the house in Austin, the vacations. It is all debt. He checks the mileage on my car. He demands to see receipts for every grocery run. He told me if I do not help him get this house sold, we lose everything. And if I try to leave him, he said he has lawyers who will ensure I never see a dime of child support. I looked at the young woman I had considered an enemy just 24 hours ago. I saw the terror in her eyes. Gavin was not just bullying me, he was holding his own family hostage with fear. He tells me I am nothing without him, Melanie said, her voice trembling. He says I am just a pretty face he bought and paid for. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was ice cold. You are not nothing. Melanie, I said. She looked up, surprised by my touch. I was beginning to see the cracks in Gavin's armor. He was desperate. He was terrified. And he was creating enemies in the very people he should have been protecting. I realized then that I did not just have a lawyer and a trust fund. I potentially had an inside man. Go back to him, I said, my voice steady. Act like you are on his side. Push me to sign. Make him believe he is winning. Melanie looked confused. What? Why? Because, I said, standing up and buttoning my coat. When he thinks he has won, he gets careless. And when he gets careless, we get our proof. I pulled my old sedan into the driveway of the house that was legally mine, but which felt like enemy territory. Before I stepped out, I adjusted the silver hair clip pinned securely above my right ear. It was a vintage piece, or so it looked. But inside the filigree metalwork was a tiny, high-definition recording device Rosa had handed me just hours before. Get him talking, Rosa had said. And do not interrupt when he starts digging his own grave. I took a deep breath, smoothed my skirt, and walked up the porch steps. I was not the grieving widow anymore. I was a spy in my own home. Gavin opened the door before I could knock. He looked relieved, smug even, as if my return confirmed his worldview that money always wins. Glad you finally came to your senses. Mum, he said, stepping back to let me in. I told the movers to hold off for 24 hours. See, I am not a monster. Thank you. Gavin? I said, my voice deliberately small and tremulous. I need a few days to pack, just until I find the right facility. He clapped his hands together. Perfect. Let me show you what the developers are planning. It will make you feel better to know this place is going to have a future. He led me through the living room, pointing at the walls Harold and I had painted a soft cream colour just last year. This wall goes, Gavin declared, sweeping his arm through the air. Open concept. They are going to knock out the kitchen partition too. Modernise the flow. Honestly, Mum, I do not know how you lived in this cramped layout for 40 years. I touched the recording device lightly. It was home to us. Gavin. He scoffed. It was a depreciation pit. But do not worry. I will turn it into capital. Dinner was a takeout affair eaten out of styrofoam containers on the dining table. The air was thick with tension. Melanie ate silently, glancing at me with nervous eyes, remembering our conversation at the coffee shop. You should be grateful. Really? Gavin said, stabbing a piece of steak with aggressive force. Most sons would have just put you on the street. I am letting you crash here for a few days. I am paying for the nursing home. It is very generous of you. I lied, forcing down a bite of cold potatoes. It is just business, he replied, taking a swig of wine. Your time is over. Mum, assets need to be managed by people who understand the market. You and Dad, you just sat on equity like it was a souvenir. Melanie cleared her throat. Gavin, maybe your mum could stay in the back guest room. Just for a while, she does not take up much space. Gavin dropped his fork. It clattered loudly against the china. Are you stupid? He hissed at her, his face flushing red. We cannot keep her here. I already leveraged the deposit on this place to cover the margin call on the Novus Frontier deal. If I do not hand over vacant possession by Friday, the whole financing structure collapses. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had it. He had just admitted to using the house funds for his failing business. I decided to push harder. I looked him dead in the eye. Your father always said you were reckless. Gavin. That is why he never let you handle the legal paperwork. He knew you did not understand the law. Gavin slammed his fist on the table. Dad didn't know anything. He was a coward. Who do you think signed the refinancing papers on this place 5 years ago? He was too scared to take the risk. So I signed his name for him. He never even knew. The room went dead silent. I felt the weight of the recorder in my hair. He had just confessed to forgery. You signed his name, I whispered, feigning shock to ensure the microphone caught my voice clearly. I did what had to be done, Gavin shouted, standing up and looming over me. And look where it got us. I am a CEO, Mom. I made this family relevant later that night. The house finally fell quiet. I crept out of the guest room, my feet knowing every creak in the floorboards. I slipped into the study, Gavin's temporary command center. His leather bag was open. I found a stack of bank cards and documents. I used my phone to snap photos of the credit cards. They were in his name, but linked to a joint account number I recognized as Harold's old emergency fund. Then I heard voices. I froze, pressing myself into the shadows of the hallway. You do not understand. Mel. Gavin's voice was a jagged whisper coming from the master bedroom. These aren't banks. These are private lenders. If this sale does not close, if I cannot pay them back by Monday, they are going to hurt me. They said they would come for us. Oh God. Gavin. Melanie sobbed. Shut up. Just get her to sign the papers. Make her sign them tomorrow. I retreated to my room, my hands shaking, but not from fear. I packed my small bag. I had enough. I had the confession of forgery. I had the admission of fraud. And I had the motive. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen wearing my coat. Gavin was nursing a hangover, staring blankly at his phone. I am going to look at that nursing home in North Austin, I said. The one you recommended? Gavin didn't even look up. Good. Don't take too long. I walked out the front door, the recording device burning a hole in my pocket. I was not going to a nursing home. I was going to Rosa's office. The nice, confused old lady had just left the building. The woman who walked down the driveway was a mother who was done protecting a predator. With the help of Rosa and a secret savings account, Harold had tucked away inside the Living Horizon Trust. I left the damp motel room for good. I did not go back to Cedar Falls. Instead, I rented a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Austin. It was small, just 600 square feet, with laminate floors and a view of a parking garage. but it was the first place I had chosen for myself in 40 years. It was silent, clean, and completely void of Gavin's suffocating presence. My transformation began on a Tuesday morning. I walked into a budget salon called New You and sat in the chair of a stylist named Kendra, a girl with bright pink hair and a smile that could power a small city. "I want to look like someone who fights back," I told her, staring at my reflection. The woman in the mirror looked tired, with limp grey hair and glasses that slid down her nose. Kendra nodded, snapping her gum. "Say no more. Honey, we are going to sharpen those edges." 2 hours later. My hair was cut into a sleek, silver bob that framed my face with dignity rather than defeat. I went to an optometrist and traded my wire-rimmed bifocals for sharp, black frames. I bought a tailored blazer and slacks from a consignment shop. When I walked down the street, I caught my reflection in a shop window and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like a widow. Yes, but she also looked dangerous. Rosa suggested I join a support group for victims of financial abuse. The first time I went, I sat in the back and said nothing. I listened to a woman named Sarah talk about how her nephew had drained her retirement fund. "They use our love against us," Sarah said, weeping. "They know we will not call the police because we changed their diapers." I raised my hand. My voice was shaky, but I forced the words out. "It is not sacrifice. It is theft. And we have rights." Rosa introduced me to Luke, an investigative journalist for a local news channel. We met in a booth at the back of a diner. Luke was young, intense, and had dark circles under his eyes. He had been tracking Novus Frontier Ventures for months. "We know they are a Ponzi scheme wrapped in a tech startup," Luke said, leaning in. "But we need a link to the inside. We need to know where the money is coming from." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder containing copies of Harold's documents and the digital file of the recording from my hair clip. "My son is Gavin Whitford," I said. "He is a co-founder. And on this recording, you will hear him admit to forging my husband's signature and borrowing money from private lenders who threaten violence." Luke listened to the audio through his headphones. His eyes went wide. He looked up at me with a mix of shock and respect. "Mrs. Whitford," he whispered. This is the nail in the coffin. But if I run this, his reputation is incinerated." "Are you sure he burned his own reputation?" I replied coldly. "I am just handing you the matches, but you keep my name out of it until I say otherwise." While Luke went to work, I called Martin in Dallas. He activated the defense protocols of the Living Horizon Trust. He sent a formal cease and desist letter to Gavin, to the real estate developers, and to the bank. The letter stated clearly that any attempt to sell or encumber the property was a violation of the trust and would result in immediate legal action. The trap was sprung. The house was now legally radioactive. I also met with a financial advisor from Fairstone Advisory. He went over the trust details with me. "Eleanor," he said, looking at the numbers, "Harold invested very conservatively but very wisely. If we structure this right, you have enough to live comfortably for 20 years. You do not need Gavin. You never did." That night, I stood by the window of my apartment. I held a glass of red wine and looked out at the lights of Austin. Below me, cars moved like rivers of light. I held the action plan Rosa had typed up for me. It was a list of dates, court filings, and media drops. I thought about Gavin. I imagined him right now, receiving the letter from Martin, realizing his quick sale was dead in the water. I imagined him explaining to his dangerous lenders why he did not have their money. "It is my turn now," I said to the empty room. I was no longer the mother who waited by the phone. I was the storm gathering on his horizon. The collapse of my son's empire did not happen with a bang, but with the quiet ping of an email notification. It started on a Wednesday morning. Martin, my husband's lawyer in Dallas, sent the formal notice to Horizon Ridge Developments and the bank. The legal document stated clearly that the property on Elm Street was subject to a living trust and that any attempt to sell it without the beneficiary's consent, my consent, was void. Within 2 hours, the developers pulled their offer. They were not interested in buying a lawsuit. Simultaneously, the bank flagged the mortgage application. Their fraud department had received a tip courtesy of my conversation with Rosa that the collateral for the loan was disputed property. They froze the disbursement of $200,000 that Gavin was frantically waiting for. Gavin was now a man standing on a trapdoor with the rope around his neck. I knew he needed that money to pay off the private lenders he had whispered about in the middle of the night. Desperation makes people stupid, and Gavin was terrified. According to the financial records Luke later uncovered, Gavin logged into the corporate accounts of Novus Frontier Ventures at 2 p.m. and transferred $150,000 into his personal checking account. He broke the cardinal rule of his own investors' agreement. Then, the second blow landed. At 6 o'clock that evening, I sat in my apartment and turned on the local news. Luke's face filled the screen. The headline read, "The House of Cards, Novus Frontier. Investigated. We have uncovered documents linking local entrepreneur Gavin Whitford to a series of misappropriated funds," Luke said into the camera, his voice steady and damning. While Whitford claims to be merely an advisor, corporate filings show he is a co-founder who has used investor capital to fund a lavish lifestyle, including luxury vehicles and personal real estate. I watched footage of Gavin walking out of his office in Austin, shielding his face with a briefcase. He looked small. He looked guilty. The fallout was immediate. My phone buzzed with alerts. A class action lawsuit was being formed by the smaller investors. The State Securities Board announced a formal inquiry, and somewhere in that chaos, Melanie finally woke up. She told me later that she went into Gavin's home office while he was shouting at his PR team on the phone. She opened the drawer he usually kept locked, the lock he had forgotten to engage in his panic. She saw the credit card statements. She saw the overdue notices. She realized that the Mercedes in the driveway, the vacations to Italy, the designer clothes, it was all bought with stolen money. She was not the wife of a tycoon. She was the wife of a thief. She called a divorce lawyer that same afternoon, using a burner phone she bought at a grocery store. The next day, the bank called Gavin in. They did not want to talk about his loan. They wanted to talk about Harold. They laid the mortgage papers from 5 years ago on the desk and asked him to explain why the signature did not match the one on Harold's driver's license. They told him they had been contacted by the estate's attorney regarding potential forgery. The walls were closing in, and the pressure cooked the last bit of sanity out of him. Melanie overheard the call that broke him. She was standing in the hallway of their Austin home when Gavin's phone rang. He put it on speaker, his hands shaking too hard to hold it to his ear. "We do not care about your news report." "Gavin," a voice rasped, heavy and low. "You owe us $400,000. You said you had the house sale locked. If we do not see a wire transfer by Monday, we will come visit your wife and kids." Melanie packed a bag for the children 10 minutes later. I watched it all from my sanctuary in the city. I sat in my armchair, sipping herbal tea, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and profound sorrow. I had raised this boy. I had wiped his nose and cheered at his baseball games. To see him destroy himself was like watching a slow-motion car crash. But every time I felt a twinge of pity, I remembered him throwing the keys on the table. I remembered him telling me to get out of his life. I was not saving him this time. On Friday night, there was a frantic pounding on my apartment door. I looked through the peephole. It was Gavin. He looked 20 years older than he had at the funeral. His tie was undone, his eyes were bloodshot, and he had not shaved in 2 days. I opened the door, but left the security chain on. "Mum," he breathed, his voice cracking. "Mum, please. You have to let me in. What do you want?" "Gavin?" I asked, keeping my face impassive. He pressed his face against the crack in the door, sweat beading on his forehead. "You have to stop the lawyer. You have to tell them it was a mistake. Tell them you gave me permission to sign Dad's name. Please. If you don't, if I can't sell the house." He looked over his shoulder, checking the empty hallway, terrified of shadows. "They are going to kill me. Mum, do you hear me? They will kill us all. You did this. Gavin," I said quietly. "You made these choices." "I did it for the family," he screamed, slamming his hand against the doorframe. "I did it to be someone. You owe me this. I am your son. You ceased to be my son the day you sold my home out from under me." I said, "I am not withdrawing the claim, and I am not opening this door." I slammed it shut and locked the deadbolt. I could hear him sobbing on the other side, banging his fists against the wood, sliding down to the floor. I leaned my back against the door, my heart pounding, tears finally streaming down my face. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but I knew that opening that door would not save him. It would only drown us both. The morning after I locked Gavin out, he returned. He did not bang on the door this time. He waited in the lobby until a neighbor let him in, and then he stood outside my apartment door, looking like a man who had not slept in 3 days. I opened the door with the security chain still engaged, but when I saw him drop to his knees on the hallway carpet, weeping openly, I unhooked the chain. I let him in, not out of pity, but because I needed him to see that I was no longer the victim he thought he could trample. He crawled toward the sofa, his expensive suit wrinkled and stained. "Mum, you have to stop this," he begged, his hands clasping together in a prayer that felt profane coming from him. "The bank has frozen everything. The investors are pulling out. If you do not retract the statement to the lawyer, I am going to prison." I stood over him, my back straight, my new glasses perched firmly on my nose. "You forged your father's signature. Gavin, you stole from us. You threw me out of my own home." His face twisted, shifting instantly from sorrow to anger. He stood up, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. "I did it for the legacy," he shouted, his voice echoing off the thin walls. "Dad was too scared to make real money. I took that house, and I leveraged it to build an empire. I did it for you, to save what he left behind." I walked calmly to the small coffee table. I picked up the file folder Rosa had prepared. I laid out the copy of Harold's letter. Next to it, I placed the Living Horizon Trust deed. And finally, I set down my phone. I pressed play on the audio file I had recorded the day I went back to the house. Gavin's voice filled the room, crisp and clear. "It is my house now. Mom, get used to it." He froze. The colour drained from his face as he heard his own arrogance played back to him. It was undeniable. It was not a son saving a legacy. It was a predator discarding a burden. "You recorded me," he whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. Then he lunged. "Give me that," he screamed, reaching for the phone. I stepped back, but I did not have to fight him. The building's security guard, a burly man named Mr. Henderson, whom I had alerted before opening the door, stepped out from the kitchen where he had been waiting. He grabbed Gavin by the shoulder and pinned his arm behind his back. "That is enough, son," Mr. Henderson grunted. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They did not arrest Gavin on the spot, but they filed a detailed report of a domestic disturbance and attempted assault. It was another piece of paper, another brick in the wall I was building around him. That afternoon, I met with Luke. He had his crew set up in a rented studio. He looked at me with serious eyes. "We are ready to go live with the series on financial abuse," Luke said. "But we need a face. Are you ready to tell them who you are?" I thought about the fear in Melanie's eyes. I thought about Harold's trembling signature on those loan documents. "I am ready," I said. The interview aired on the 6 o'clock news. I sat in a chair, bathed in soft light, and told the world what had happened. I described the cremation, the candle on the table, and the cold demand to move into a nursing home. I did not name Gavin. I simply referred to him as my only son. But Luke edited my interview with B-roll footage of the Novus Frontier scandal, showing blurred images of Gavin walking into court. The connection was instant. In Cedar Falls, the broadcast spread like wildfire. The woman who ran the bakery recognized my story. The deacon at the church recognized the timeline. Within an hour, the name Gavin Whitford was trending on local social media groups. The rich son who had bragged about his success was unmasked as the man who tried to evict his grieving mother. Then came the final blow. My neighbour, Carol, sent a file to Luke. It was footage from her doorbell camera, recorded the day Gavin had changed the locks. The video was grainy, but the audio was perfect. It showed Gavin standing on the porch, screaming at the closed door. "This is my property. You are just a guest. Get out of my life." Luke aired the clip on the 10 o'clock update. Gavin tried to fight back. He created a Twitter account and posted a video filmed in his car. He looked manic, his eyes darting around. "My mother is confused," he said into his phone camera, forcing a smile that looked like a grimace. "She is grieving. She is being manipulated by predatory lawyers who want to drain the estate. I love her. I am just trying to get her the care she needs." The internet did not buy it. Within minutes, users had taken the audio of him saying, "It is my house now," and remixed it into memes. They put his face on pictures of toddlers throwing tantrums. They analysed his body language. They dug up old interviews where he claimed to be a self-made man and juxtaposed them with the police report of him attacking a 67-year-old woman. His defence turned into a digital pillory. I sat in my apartment, watching the comments scroll by on my tablet. I expected to feel triumphant, but instead, I felt a deep, resonant connection. My inbox began to fill up. My daughter did this to me last year. One email read, "I signed the papers because I was scared." Read another, "Thank you for speaking up." I thought I was the only one. I put the tablet down and looked out the window. Gavin was finished. His reputation was ash. But as I read the words of strangers from all over the country, I realized that this fight was no longer just about my house or my husband. I had accidentally started a war for every parent who had ever been told they were expired. And I was going to win it for all of us. The civil trial took place in courtroom 4 of the county courthouse, a room that smelled of floor wax and stale coffee. I sat next to Rosa, my hands folded on the mahogany table to hide their trembling. Across the aisle sat Gavin. He was no longer the master of the universe who had strutted into the funeral. He was slumped in his chair, wearing a suit that looked slightly too big for him now that the stress had eaten away his weight. Beside him was a court-appointed attorney from an insurance firm, a man who looked like he would rather be anywhere else. Rosa wasted no time. She did not play games. She laid out the timeline of events like a trail of breadcrumbs leading straight to a wolf's den. "Your Honor," Rosa said, her voice ringing clear in the silence. "We are not just here to dispute a deed. We are here to expose a pattern of predation." The defendant did not just try to sell his mother's home. He tried to erase her existence to cover his own debts. She played the recording. My own voice, small and frightened, filled the room, followed by Gavin's arrogant dismissal. "It is my house now." "Mum?" I saw the judge, a stern woman with grey hair, tighten her jaw. Then came the video from Carol's doorbell camera, showing Gavin screaming on the porch. Then the bank report confirming the signature on the mortgage documents was a forgery. Gavin's lawyer tried to object, painting Gavin as a desperate businessman who had made procedural errors in an attempt to save the family fortune. He loved his father. The lawyer stammered. He was trying to maximize the estate's value. That was when the doors opened, and Martin walked in. He had flown in from Dallas that morning. He took the stand as an expert witness on the Living Horizon Trust. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at Gavin. "There is a clause in the trust that Mr. Whitford seems to have overlooked," Martin testified, opening a thick binder. Section 4, paragraph B. It states that if any beneficiary attempts to use the trust's assets as collateral for personal or business loans without the express written consent of the primary beneficiary Eleanor, they do not just lose their right to manage the property. Martin paused, letting the silence stretch until it was painful. They forfeit their entire inheritance. Martin finished. The assets are immediately redirected to the secondary beneficiary designated by Harold Whitford. Gavin sat up straight, his face draining of colour. "What that? That is not possible." Martin produced the loan documents from Novus Frontier Ventures, dating back 3 years. They showed clearly that Gavin had listed the Cedar Falls property as a guarantee for his startup capital. He had triggered the forfeiture clause years ago. He just did not know it. The judge looked over the documents for a long time. When she looked up, her eyes were hard. "The court finds in favour of the plaintiff," she declared. "The Living Horizon Trust is valid. Mrs. Whitford retains a life estate in the property. Furthermore, due to the violation of Section 4, the court orders that Gavin Whitford is removed as a beneficiary. The remaining assets in the trust, including the eventual title to the house, are to be transferred to the Harold Whitford Engineering Scholarship Fund." I heard a gasp. It came from Gavin. He had not just lost the house. He had lost the future money he thought would save him from his creditors. He was now destitute. The gavel banged, a sound like a gunshot ending the war. But it was not over. As we stood to leave, the district attorney, who had been sitting in the back row, stepped forward. He approached Gavin's table with 2 uniformed officers. "Gavin Whitford," the DA said, loud enough for the press in the gallery to hear. "You are under arrest for forgery, bank fraud, and elder financial abuse. I stood frozen. I watched as the officers pulled Gavin's hands behind his back and clicked the handcuffs into place. The sound was final. Cold. After the arraignment, Gavin's lawyer requested a brief moment for his client to speak with me in a private conference room, under guard. Rosa advised against it, but I needed to close the door myself. I walked into the small, windowless room. Gavin was sitting at a metal table, still cuffed. He looked up at me, his eyes wet with tears that seemed half genuine and half terrified. "Mom," he choked out. "Mom, listen. You can stop the criminal charges. Tell them you do not want to press charges. If you do, I will give you the house back. I will disappear. I will go to Mexico. Just do not let me go to prison." He was bargaining with chips he no longer held. He still thought he could negotiate his way out of morality. I looked at the son I had birthed, the boy I had protected from the world for 40 years. I saw the fear in him, but I also saw the calculation. He was sorry he got caught, not sorry for what he did. "The house is already mine. Gavin," I said, my voice steady and dry. "It was never yours to give back. Please," he sobbed, leaning his forehead against the cold table. "I am your son." I placed my hand on the doorknob. "You chose this path," I told him. "You signed the papers. You made the threats. I am not sending you to prison. Gavin, I am just letting the law shine the light on what you built." I turned and walked out, leaving him in the grey room, the heavy steel door clicking shut behind me. The criminal trial began 4 months later, just as the winter frost was finally melting off the roofs in Cedar Falls. The courtroom was packed every single day. The local community had turned out in droves, and there were even news vans from Austin parked outside. When Gavin was led into the room, a hush fell over the crowd. He looked hollowed out. His expensive suit hung loosely on his frame, and his skin had a grey, pasty quality to it. Yet, even in handcuffs. He held his chin up, scanning the room with a look of bewildered arrogance, as if he still believed this was all just a terrible misunderstanding that he could talk his way out of. The prosecutor was a young, sharp man who did not waste time with theatrics. He laid out the timeline of Gavin's life like a forensic autopsy. He showed the jury how Gavin had leveraged Harold's good name to build a house of cards. He displayed the forged loan documents, the threatening emails from private lenders, and the timeline of the attempted eviction. He painted a picture not of a desperate son, but of a man who had built a throne upon the fractured trust of the elderly people who loved him most. When it was my turn to take the stand, I walked up the aisle with a steady rhythm. I did not look at Gavin. I sat in the witness chair and swore to tell the truth. "Mrs. Whitford," the prosecutor asked gently, "what did your son say to you the day after your husband's funeral?" I leaned into the microphone. My voice did not shake. "He told me that my time was over. He told me he had changed the locks. And he looked me in the eye and said, 'It is my house now. Mom.'" A ripple of murmurs went through the jury box. I saw a woman in the back row wipe a tear from her eye. I felt a strange sense of calm. I was no longer the victim in the story. I was the narrator, and I was finally holding the pen. Melanie testified next. That was the surprise that sealed Gavin's fate. She looked small and frightened, but she spoke clearly. She admitted that she had known about the debts. She admitted that Gavin had bullied her into lying to me, threatening to leave her destitute if she did not help him secure the house. "I am sorry. Eleanor," she said, looking directly at me from the stand, her voice breaking. I was so scared of losing my lifestyle that I almost let him destroy yours. Gavin's defense attorney tried to spin a narrative about childhood trauma and the immense pressure of the tech industry. He claimed Gavin was acting out of grief and panic, not malice. But then the prosecutor played the video from Carol's doorbell camera. The sound of Gavin screaming for me to get out of his life filled the high-ceilinged room. It echoed off the wood paneling, stripping away any pretense of a loving son under stress. The brutality of his entitlement was undeniable. The jury deliberated for only 3 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood up and read the verdict. Guilty on all counts of fraud, guilty of forgery, guilty of elder abuse. The judge, a stern man who had watched the proceedings with a scowl, looked over his glasses at Gavin. He cited the state's elder protection laws, emphasizing that crimes against parents by their children were a betrayal of the highest order. He sentenced Gavin to a term in state prison long enough to ensure his youth would be gone by the time he saw freedom. He also ordered full restitution and issued a permanent ban preventing Gavin from ever managing financial assets for another person again. After the gavel banged, the bailiffs moved to take Gavin away. In the chaos of the hallway, he managed to catch my eye. He stopped, causing the officers to pause for a second. "Mom," he whispered, his eyes wide and pleading. "Mom, come visit me. Please, I can fix this. Just wait for me. We can start over when I get out." I looked at him, at the man who had thrown my keys on the table and treated me like an expired asset. I felt a pang of sadness for the little boy he used to be. But that boy was long gone. "I am not waiting for you, Gavin," I said softly. "I spent 40 years waiting for you to grow up. From now on, I am going to use the rest of my life to live for myself, not for your empty promises." I turned my back on him and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. 2 days later, I stood on the porch of the house on Elm Street. The legal battle was over. The Living Horizon Trust was secure, acting as an impenetrable fortress around my home. I walked inside and placed Harold's urn back on the mantel, right where it belonged. The house was quiet, but it was not empty. Outside, a delivery truck was pulling up with a new sofa. I had picked out one that was blue, not the beige Gavin had insisted was marketable. I had called a locksmith that morning, not because I was afraid of my son coming back, but because I wanted to be the one to decide who held the keys. I closed the front door and locked it with a satisfying click. I took a deep breath, smelling the scent of lemon polish and old wood. I was alone, but I was free. "It is my house now," I whispered to the empty room, and for the first time, the words did not sound like a threat. They sounded like a victory. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. I hope it reminded you that it is never too late to stand up for yourself. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on Eleanor's journey. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need to hear it.